will happen to you in this life. By cleaning up our ethical act, it then is possible to go deeper in terms of the purification of our minds and hearts that comes through meditation. It's very difficult to go deep in meditation if you haven't developed ethical conduct. And it's obvious, you know, people who are habitually harming are agitated and anxious. They're afraid of reprisal, they're afraid of getting caught. There's self-doubt and shame, guilt. So cleaning up our act, then it then becomes possible then to go deep in meditation. And by going deep in meditation, then we can purify our understanding or come to wisdom. So you see how, and the wise mind does less harm. You know, all three of these aspects really support each other. So the Buddha said, if you're ethically careful, then you have worldly happiness. If you go deep in meditation, you have celestial happiness. Because all that stuff about being blissed out is true. Bliss and rapture and a sense of wholeness and luminosity. The end of internal conflict. It's really amazing forms of happiness that we normally can't even imagine come through meditation. So celestial happiness, and then he said, and if you develop very deep understanding or wisdom, he said you have unconditional happiness. Happiness that cannot be affected by any external event. This may sound abstract, you know, to somehow or other we're going to develop hearts and minds that are free from fear, free from greed, free from anger, free from confusion. So let me just give you a little example, kind of a famous example from the Korean Zen tradition. And you may have heard this before, but Korea has gone through a bunch of cycles in its long history of having strong central powers, and then times when the central power falls apart, and then the country has turned into basically civil war with a lot of warlords fighting for territory. And during one of those periods where there was a lot of civil war and warlords fighting for territory, particularly bloodthirsty warlord captured a city. And as the warlord was coming, the entire city emptied out. They evacuated. Except for one person. And that was the Zen master who refused to leave, let's say, her temple. And so she stayed in meditation in her temple. And when this warlord found out that there was someone who wasn't afraid of him and wasn't even willing to greet him, he came storming into the temple, waving his sword, and he said to the Zen master, "Don't you know that I am one who can run you through without batting an eye?" And the Zen master opened her eyes and said quietly, "Sorry, don't you know that I am one who can be run through without batting an eye?" So the warlord, seeing the superior being, bowed and left. So that's an example of a mastered mind, a mind that is no longer controlled by fear. This is possible. So, and I'm sharing this kind of this view of our threefold practice, just by way of asking, is it possible, especially since this isn't a religion? And by the way, this is just a little aside, but I have a T-shirt that I love that says, "Religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for people who have already been there." So it's not a religion; it's a spiritual tradition. But I'm just wondering whether it might be useful, really, to have a vision of liberation or awakening. So it's not just about meditation helping with this and meditation helping with that. You know, the danger we have in the West is that we're going to forget about the radical possibility we can forget about the radical possibility of spiritual practice. But you can't just meditate. You have to do the other stuff too. You have to do the ethical stuff. And and the consequences, if you don't, are grave. You know, we all know how many religious and spiritual leaders, including Buddhist leaders, have committed terrible acts of sexual misconduct because there hasn't been enough emphasis on ethics. It's heartbreaking, actually. People lose their faith in the path because they've been abused, or their friend has been abused. So would it be possible, just in terms of doing this research, to, for example, to actually study how the purification that comes from ethical conduct actually does allow people to go deeper in meditation? And how meditation actually can support people's ethical conduct? And would it be possible, and I don't know quite how you would do this, but to actually embrace the idea of wisdom or understanding, and to see how ethical conduct and meditation can lead to profound understanding? And when I say that, let me just be clear about what I mean. Right understanding or wisdom, there are a number of things that we become more and more clear about, intuitively clear, not intellectually clear. But the most important thing that we become clear about is to discover that there is no separation. The Buddha said, "In separation lies the world's great misery." And actually, if you really want to take that lens and analyze what happens in the world, he's right. When we get beyond separation, and there are basically two ways that we can do it, the two great tools of any spiritual tradition, it has to be the two great tools of any spiritual tradition, is we use awareness that will lead us to the understanding that we're not separate, or love and compassion will also lead us to the understanding that we're not separate. You know, clear mind, open heart, that's the whole trip. It's both the means and the end of this practice. So I realize all of this sounds abstract, so I'd like to just invite us for just a minute, and literally pretty quickly here. If you don't mind, we can just do a little tiny exercise that may give you some sense about. So if you don't mind just sitting with and closing your eyes, you don't have to be formal about it. And if you would, bring your attention to your hands. They're actually not your hands.